Namaste, and welcome back to our series, What's in a Word? Here we'll delve into the origins and background of certain everyday English words that we use when talking about or explaining Hindu Dharmas. I'm Samir and Kalra, one of the managing directors at HAF, and as usual, I'm joined by my colleague and HAF's Director of Education, Dr. Vijay Satnarine.
Namaste.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So, Vijay, today we're going to be talking about the word God. When I search for a definition of the word God, the Collins Dictionary states that God is a proper noun. The name God is given to the spirit or being who is worshipped as a creator and ruler of the world, especially by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. So I can already see some problems with that definition. But Vijay, why don't you tell us a little bit more about where does the word God originate from?
As you can imagine, this is a loaded term. So I would say take a deep breath and join me on this little bit of a journey. It's an old Germanic word, and it is the word that they used called Gott. It has a cognate or relationship with the word from an even earlier language, which was Proto-Indo-European, right? That supposed language from which all languages that have similarities come from. And in that language, the word that they think it comes from is something called gut. And that's got a strong relationship with the Sanskrit word hutta, which it just means something that is poured out, something that receives offerings. So it signaled a relationship with a powerful being. You would give something, and then that powerful being would return something to you, or the other way around. You would show your gratitude, and that is why it was known as Gut, and in Sanskrit, hutta. Hutasana, for example, is the name of Agni, the one who consumes things that are given to him. So it was a neuter gendered word originally in Germanic, but when the Germanic areas of Europe became Christianized, it transitioned into becoming a masculine word because, of course, they took that word to refer to one very specific concept in Christianity. So God is a name placed on a category, and God is not a word that appears in the Hebrew Bible. The original word in the Bible for what we say as God today is the simple word El. And El is a general name that refers to a being of power and, importantly, of might. In the Torah, in the Bible, and in the Quran, the only El worthy of worship is the being that has the personal name Yahweh or Jehovah or Allah, depending on the religion. And one of the main reasons they give for the worship of God as El is because El is the creator of heaven and earth.
Wow, that was very complex. But thank you for breaking that down for us. So then, simply put, why should we actually avoid using the word God?
So I think, again, complexity, unfortunately, is the theme for today, but I'm sure we're going to do it a little bit of a justice if we understand two major concepts. In Hindu traditions, across the board, there is the recognition and understanding of the centrality of the concept of Ishwara. But there is also the concept in the philosophical schools known as Brahman. So we're going to deal with those two concepts and then see if God actually maps onto any of those two concepts. Okay? So, number one, Brahman is a non-theist philosophical concept that is not simply a being. Ishwara is a monotheist concept. Sometimes Brahman and Ishwara are equated in our traditions, but in others, they're clearly distinct. Nevertheless, Ishwara is the impulse of existence, and we could think of it as God, but the monotheist Hindu traditions of Shakta, Shaiva, Vaishnava, and Kaumaram, even the Smartas, they venerate Ishwara as supreme and give Ishwara their devotion. But there's an issue. Ishwara is not the creator, and so Ishwara cannot match the definition of God. That's a big difference. There are multiple universes in Hindu understanding, and each of them have a creator, and that creator being is known as Brahma or Prajapati. He's not supreme in any of our Hindu Dharma traditions. So the English word God can't match onto Ishwara, because if God as the creator is the main definition, then for us, Brahma is not the main, even though he is the creator of this particular universe out of many, many universes. The second part of it is that the majority of our ancient Hindu traditions don't believe in creation. So the notion that God took matter and physically manipulated and created the multiverse as it is, that as a concept does not exist in the majority of our Hindu Dharma traditions. Instead, we teach that Ishwara is the Srishti Karta. The word Srishti confuses people. Srishti means emanation. It does not mean creation. It is the one from and in whom the multiverse emanates. So there's no beginning of the multiverse. It simply manifests, remains, and then goes through dissolution in cycle after cycle within this being, or this principle rather. And it will continue to do so for eternity. So our perception of the multiverse is vastly different than the perception of the creation that exists in the languages that use the word God. As you can see, there's an absolute mismatch of worldviews here, and taking the easy route has many problems. One of those, especially when moving to the Western world, and of course it's common in the East, I must say, but if we are seen not to be worshipping the supposed correct God, we would be accused or thought of, if not outright accused, of worshipping a false god, false gods, and thus be labeled polytheist, heathen, or heretic.
Got it. Got it. So that's quite a bit to digest, and that's why you're the doctor. But if we were just to put this in simple terms for the average Hindu that wants to explain or use an alternative word, what is an alternative English word that we could use to God, and why would that be more appropriate?
So a simple translation for what Ishwara is supreme being. Brahman is a different story. And we should never, ever translate Brahman with the simplistic word God. Why? Because God is theos and Brahman is a non-theist principle. Hindu seers use that principle to refer to the theoretical source of everything. Just like scientists, you know your science from 10th grade and so on.
Not very well, but yes.
Right. Where, they went and they tried to analyze where everything comes from, and they looked at substances, and then they found out, oh, there's molecules. And when advances were made, they looked at molecules and they found out, oh, there's atoms. And then they went further when they were able to, and machinery was developed, and they found subatomic particles. And now what they thought was the most subtle thing was as subatomic particles. Now they're able to see quarks and even subtler levels of energy. So similarly, our seers, through the power of the mind and through the power of insight, they were able to realize that even more subtle, there is something foundational about all existence, that matter, antimatter, time, space, intellect, consciousness, and even life, when you look for their most subtle original source, you'll find something known as Prakriti or Mahat, a very common topic in our philosophical literature. And even that itself can be seen as the facet of the principle of everything. And that principle of everything is what we call Brahman. If you go around trying to translate Brahman as principle of everything, though, I think there'll be some problems. So I think what we can do is to use a kind of accepted term and refer to Brahman as the ultimate reality. And as we do refer to it as the ultimate reality, we should affirm that Brahman is a concept which is thoroughly different to the concept of God. There's so much more to say on this topic. So listeners will please pardon boiling down these vast concepts into a few minutes, but hopefully in the future we'll get to discuss some more.
Wonderful. Well, I learned a lot. I know that. And I think the bottom line here is an alternative to Ishwar would be supreme being, and a good alternative to Brahman would be the ultimate reality. So at least we know that distinction, and we know some good English terms to utilize rather than God. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of this episode. Thank you and namaste to everyone. And please stay tuned for our next very related word of gods, plural. And we'll see you soon, everyone. Thank you and namaste.
Namaste.